Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. We're in Phoenix in Arizona where it's sunny but remarkably cold, but then it is November and we are at the ETSI NFV meeting number 8 and I'm talking with Sandra Rivera, who is with Intel. She's a Senior Director of Marketing Development. Sandra, great to see you again.
Good morning.
It is a bit chilly, isn't it?
It is.
But nonetheless, we shall batter manfully and womanfully through. You opened the ETSI meeting this morning. What did you say?
Well, first of all, I did thank all of the delegates. As with any initiative, it takes a lot of passion and commitment and unwavering focus in terms of delivering to what is a transformative initiative in our industry. But the other thing that I did was I gave them an illustration of how I see the industry momentum building around all things NFV, and how, like with a flywheel, it takes a lot of pushing and driving in the same direction, a broad collective of individuals really kind of focused on that goal, and how at one point, once you build up enough momentum, it becomes a very powerful force and you get through that to that breakthrough result. So I use that to really illustrate exactly where we've been now for the last couple of years. A lot of pushing, a lot of alignment in the same direction, but really reaching that point now where we're at that breakthrough sort of view of the result that we're trying to achieve.
So the juggernaut's on the move, yeah, and it's rolling in the right direction. Let's go back to where NFV began, coming in many ways out of the data center and out of the concept of the cloud. Mm-hmm. How have you seen that develop over the past 2 years?
Well, if we look at what happened in the data center world that then led to all of the innovation around cloud, it was really anchored on 3 key principles. One is technology innovation. The second, a commitment to open standards, whether that's formal standards development organizations or open source projects, and then third, an enabling of a broad ecosystem. And when you have those ingredients or those foundational elements, you see that you, in effect, lower the barrier of innovation, increase the collective innovation from a broad brain trust of market participants, and then reach that point where you unlock and unleash new capabilities, new business models, new opportunities for all of us.
Okay, now, as we've said, NFV came from nowhere, burst onto the scene very, very quickly and matured very rapidly. And this meeting basically is significant because it marks the end of phase 1 of NFV development and the beginning of phase 2. Let's start with phase 1. What do you think was achieved during that initial 2-year period? Were your perceptions correct? Were your expectations met?
So quite a lot was achieved. In fact, if you really look at an entire industry movement really born out of ETSI NFV, and in so many ways, and I think we discussed this the last time we met, it really became something much bigger than all of us that were involved at the ground floor really thought it would be. The momentum, the interest, the level of contributions and participation, and I think that's just clearly driven by business need and gaps to fulfill those business needs. So we accomplished a lot in terms of the specifications, broad membership and contributions, and in fact it gave birth to what we now know as the Open Platform for NFV, or the OPNFV collaborative project that the Linux Foundation is now hosting.
Okay. On the downside, if there is one, were there any disappointments or particularly intractable problems that you found difficult to solve during phase 1?
I think with all complex initiatives where you have many different points of view and many different participants from different organizations or even as individuals, there is that storming, forming phase that needs to happen before you get to the norming, performing phase. And I think if we were to be really honest about that initial phase, it took probably longer to get through that storming, forming than any of us would have liked. But once we got to that the normative phase, if you will, in fact, the phase that we're upon right now in terms of phase 2, you see a group of very committed, passionate individuals and representing their companies that, again, are really focused on that vision of taking volume server economics, taking virtualization technology, and taking cloud business models and applying those to the networking industry.
Let's look to the future then, Sandra. This is the beginning of phase 2. There's a lot to be done here. It's going to be finalised and ratified here at this meeting, if at all possible. What are your hopes and expectations for the next phase?
So the next phase is really about getting to a level of interoperability in terms of the solution providers. This is indeed what the end customers are seeking, is more choice in the market, more modularity, best of breed opportunities in terms of implementation into their networks, a level of agility and scalability that is very, very difficult today. So phase 2 is very much defined by how we get to that multi-vendor interoperable phase in terms of the market evolution, as well as how you reap the benefits of automated provisioning, elasticity in the network, and just a much more dynamic environment by which new services and applications can be rolled out.
There are, I believe, 38 different sort of areas of discussion, debate that have to be sort of agreed upon and then prioritised over the next 3 days so that the whole thing can move forward. That's a tall order for a 3-day conference, isn't it?
You know, what is the analogy we use? Eating the elephant one bite at a time, right? Those 38 different discussion topics are carved out into more digestible chunks in terms of smaller work teams and work groups. So again, very focused on the specific problem set that they are tasked and responsible for.
You mentioned interoperability, Sandra. The other one, of course, is this ETSI working with other standards bodies, and those standards bodies seem to be proliferating out of nowhere. Again, some have been around for a while, but new ones are there all the time. How's that working out? Is that relationship a good relationship? Do you think there is a factor of people jumping on the bandwagon because they see it's a good thing to do?
Well, I mean, there certainly is a lot of interest coming from, again, the standards development organizations as well as the open source projects. We touched on OPNFV a few minutes ago, but OpenStack, Open Daylight, Open vSwitch, all of those initiatives working in conjunction with ETSI, IETF, and other standards development organizations. I think that the more interest that we get in the market and the more participation we get, the better we will be in terms of aligning around the core sets of values and benefits that we're all marching towards. Sometimes that creates some creative tension, let's say, but in the limit, I think having more people in the discussion and making the decisions and moving forward is actually better, so that you're not trying to play catch up later. So it's just part of the process. I think it's okay.
Along with the vendors, there are 37 now operator partners, members of the ETSI NFV, which is a goodly number, and they represent a lot of the world. How are the relations between the different parties in the ETSI NFV working out? Is it good for discussion? Do you find that the operators are more assertive than they have been in the past?
Well, I think the fact that the operators are so integrally involved is critical in terms of ensuring that the solutions that the vendor community are investing in and developing will meet the needs of the end customer. So to me, that just means that we should get to the right answers more quickly, as opposed to a bit more trial and error when perhaps we look at it in a more insular fashion. I think the Network Operating Council and that structure of ETSI NFV has actually been one of the keys to how successful the overall initiative has been and why there is such a broad interest from the vendor community, because you realize that your market opportunity is much greater than perhaps even just the service providers that you're normally dealing with day to day.
You mentioned OPNFV, Sandra. It's going to produce open source code that will enable the realization of NFV solutions. How do you see that going forward? I mean, who's going to contribute and how? And will that work be handed on and fed back into ETSI?
So OPNFV is an open source collaborative project. Anyone can contribute. You don't have to be a formal member. So from that perspective, it's quite open to all of the industry to participate. Most of the contributions come from the developer community because, in fact, at the end of the day, what you're trying to deliver is a software framework and an actual release of software that you know works and you can anchor on in terms of building your solutions. We have, within OPNFV, really looked to ETSI to provide the foundational specifications for how we're going to build the software framework in OPNFV. So ETSI really defines the what in terms of the specifications and the requirements, and OPNFV defines the how those commercial solutions will be brought to market. So I think it's going to continue to be a very collaborative environment of kind of the informing of what OPNFV needs to do and then feeding back what we have uncovered and discovered when we go and deploy solutions back into that specification.
So as far as the relationships are concerned, it's more symbiotic than anything else?
Quite, and in fact many of the members of ETSI NFV are also participating in OPNFV and other open source projects. So it's, you know, the telecommunications industry is the world's, you know, sort of biggest, smallest industry. I feel like it's the same 12 of us that are that are driving forward this transformation that's happening in the network.
An important part of what's been going on in phase 1 and is being carried forward into phase 2 is the proof of concept, the PoC. But that has now to evolve into a more formal scenario for phase 2. What's Intel's part in that and how do you see that progressing?
Well, we have been committed to the proof of concept process from the very beginning and have participated in many of the ones that have been formally approved by ETSI. And the reason for that is that I think there's only so much that you can do in terms of writing down specifications and doing some of the foundational work that goes into the development process. At some point, you do have to engage and see. You do have to get out there in terms of deploying and uncovering the very real issues that come with commercial deployment. And many times you realize that there are not so many technical barriers to deployment, but more commercial and business process and operationalization. And from that perspective, that proof of concept, that concrete set of deliverables that come out and the learnings that come out of that effort and that process, I think is critically important, and we're deeply committed to it.
Okay, Sandra Rivera, great to see you again as usual. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.